Number 8. Arianica Primer. 27-year-old Arianica Primer tragically lost her life on her birthday, September 10, 2020, in a shooting incident at Kiss nightclub in Milwaukee. Arianica's older sister, Siobhan Oliphant, expressed the profound grief of the family, lamenting that her sister should never have died on her special day. The fatal incident began with an argument inside the nightclub, leading Arianica to step outside, where she was shot and died on the spot, never even making it to the hospital. Arianica's family, particularly her two sons, was left devastated by her untimely passing, but they remember her as an intelligent woman and a devoted mother. Siobhan Oliphant, who grew even closer to Arianica after their mother's absence during their childhood, highlighted the strong bond they shared. Arianica was always there for her, rearranging her schedule and making sacrifices to support her sister. Now, though, the family is left grappling with a painful void. The tragedy has prompted the family to reflect on the violence in Milwaukee, urging the community to cherish life and denounce such senseless acts. The Milwaukee police arrested a 36-year-old man in connection with the case, and it was set to be reviewed by the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office. However, it's now 2023, and there's been no additional media coverage on this story. Arianica Primer's untimely death serves as a heartbreaking reminder of the need to address senseless violence. Number 7. Brandy Wells. 23-year-old Brandy Wells looked forward to returning to college after putting her education on hold to focus on her marriage. The marriage didn't work out though, so in 2006 she enrolled in classes at a college in East Texas. Before returning to the classroom, she wanted to squeeze in a night of fun. On the evening of August 2nd, Brandy stopped at her mother's house in the city of Tyler, where she got all dressed up before heading to a nightclub in Longview. But she never made it home, and her Pontiac Grand Prix was found abandoned several days later on the side of rural Interstate 20. There were no signs of foul play, and no sign of Brandy. Her cell phone wasn't in the car, but her purse was. There was also a gas can in the trunk, which Brandy's relatives found odd, since it wasn't typical for her to be prepared for emergencies. Footage from the nightclub showed Brandy arriving alone at around 10:45 p.m. and leaving alone about 2 hours later. She appeared to be acting normal and didn't seem to be in any sort of distress. A man who met her at the club told police that Brandy had said she needed gas money, causing detectives to wonder if she'd asked anyone else for help that night. The fellow clubgoer, however, was ruled out as a suspect. Several days after Brandy's car was found, her cell phone was discovered in another location. Investigators identified a person connected to the phone and questioned the individual, but while they're unable to rule him out as a person of interest, they also don't have enough information to definitively say whether he was involved in Brandy's disappearance or not. And now, more than 17 years later, the case remains cold. Number 6. Amy Saint Laurent. 25-year-old Amy Saint Laurent vanished in October 2001 after a night out dancing in Portland, Maine's Old Port neighborhood. She'd recently gotten out of a long-term relationship and was enjoying her newfound freedom while focusing on her career at an aerospace manufacturer. Amy was spending the evening with a friend from Florida named Eric, but he wasn't much of a dancer, and she seemed to be hitting it off with two other men who were at the club. Eric told police that he went to use the restroom at the club, and when he came out, Amy and the two men were gone. He claimed that he went outside and even walked around the block, but couldn't find the trio. Assuming that Amy had voluntarily run off with the other customers, Eric drove back to her apartment where he was staying. But when he awoke the next morning, there was still no sign of Amy. Not knowing what else to do, and still under the impression that Amy had ditched him, he wrote her a note and left. After clearing Eric of any involvement in Amy's disappearance, investigators determined that Amy had been invited to an after-party by a 21-year-old man named Jeffrey Russ Gorman, who had an extensive criminal history. He also had a troubling record of allegations from women who believed they'd been drugged and assaulted by him, many of whom had initially felt too ashamed to come forward. Gorman told police that he drove Amy home at 2 a.m. after nobody besides his roommate showed up to the party. But Gorman's roommate told police that he came home to an empty apartment at 3 a.m. and that he woke up 2 hours later to find Gorman cleaning the bathroom. 2 months after Amy disappeared, her remains were found in a shallow grave in a wooded area near the home of Gorman's mother. She'd been shot in the head, and Gorman's mother admitted to police that her son had confessed to the crime. According to the version of events given to the police, Amy had said something that angered Gorman, and he reacted with deadly violence. Gorman was captured in Alabama after an armed standoff with law enforcement, and in the end, he was convicted of Amy's murder and was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Number 5. Richard Petrini and Danielle Imbimbo. Philadelphia natives Richard Petrini and Danielle Imbimbo met in their teens but fell out of touch with each other until 2005, when they reconnected in their mid-30s. At the time, Danielle was separated from her husband and had a young son. The future of her and Richard's relationship was uncertain, but they both seemed intent on enjoying each other's company as they tried to figure out if there was any long-term potential. So when Richard called Danielle up one day and invited her out for drinks and dinner with some friends, she eagerly took him up on the offer. Other members of their group would later recall that the pair appeared to be having a fun time throughout the evening. The couple called it a night at around 11:30 p.m. and were last seen leaving the bar. Richard planned to drive Danielle home, but neither of them made it back that night. In fact, they've been missing ever since, along with Richard's pickup truck. Both Danielle and Richard's families quickly knew that something was terribly wrong, because it was completely out of character for either of them to simply vanish into thin air without telling anyone where they were going or why. Their loved ones immediately kicked the search into high gear, hoping for a quick resolution. But more than 18 years later, they remain missing without answers. Toll camera footage revealed that Richard's truck hadn't traveled on any major bridges or roadways after leaving the bar, and while carjackings are common in Philly, the FBI found no evidence that it was likely to be the case. Based on the route the pair would have taken to reach Danielle's home, it also seems unlikely that Richard accidentally drove into the Delaware River. The friends that the pair were out with that night have all been eliminated as persons of interest, and Danielle's estranged husband was ruled out after proving that he had an airtight alibi, despite his history of harassing Richard and being possessive of Danielle. In 2014, nearly a decade after Richard and Danielle disappeared, authorities admitted that they suspected foul play and that the couple may have been killed at the hands of an organized crime group in a murder for hire. In other words, it could have been a mob hit. Investigators have also conceded that if this happens to be the case, they may never find the couple's remains or the person responsible. Number 4. Ben McDaniel. Cave diving is an unavoidably dangerous activity, but 30-year-old Ben McDaniel had a passion for it. While living at his parents' beach house in Florida in 2010, he drove to the Vortex Spring Diving Park near Ponce de Leon for a solo cave dive. 2 days later, though, employees at the park's dive shop noticed that Ben's truck had been sitting in the parking lot unattended. Ben was last seen by 2 park employees at the entrance of a submerged cave located at a depth of 58 feet below the water's surface. And since then, there's been no sign of him. Naturally, it was assumed that something went terribly wrong during Ben's dive, causing him to drown. Many believe that he ventured deep into a part of the cave system that's not normally accessed by divers, which would explain why no trace of his body has ever been found. But Ben wasn't a small guy, leading some to doubt that he somehow squeezed into one of the cave's narrow points of no return. Without a body, it's impossible to say for sure what happened to Ben. At the time of his disappearance, he was overcoming a lot of recent hurdles, including a divorce and a failed business, leading some to wonder if depression caused him to do the unthinkable. There are also theories that suggest Ben was murdered, but there's no solid evidence to indicate that this may have been the case. Ben's family has invested enormous financial resources into the search and investigation, but he remains missing more than 13 years later, leaving his loved ones without the closure they long for. Then, in 2013, he was legally declared dead. Number 3. Morgan Harrington. In October 2009, 20-year-old University of Virginia student Morgan Harrington attended a Metallica concert on campus in Charlottesville with 3 of her friends. She went to use the restroom during the show's opening performance, and never returned. When her friends called her, she told them she'd been locked out of the show due to a no re-entry policy and that she'd find a new ride home. Aside from the disappointment of missing the concert, Morgan seemed fine, so her friends didn't worry about her. But Morgan never returned home at all, and at that point her loved ones knew she likely wasn't okay. 3 months later, Morgan's remains were found in a remote field about 10 miles from the concert venue. She had several rib, arm, and skull fractures, leading the medical examiner to conclude that she died from homicidal violence. And a t-shirt she was wearing on the night of her disappearance was discovered outside an apartment building just 1.5 miles away from where the concert was held. It wasn't until 5 years later that Morgan's murder was connected to the murder of another young woman named Hannah Graham. At the time, the main suspect in Graham's murder, Jesse Matthew Jr., was also facing allegations of brutally assaulting a young woman nearly a decade earlier. The hair on Morgan's t-shirt was also identified as belonging to Matthew's dog, adding the young woman's murder to the mounting list of charges against him. Matthew pleaded guilty to murdering Morgan Harrington and Hannah Graham and received 4 consecutive life sentences. And as part of the plea agreement, he forfeited his right to appeal and won't be eligible for release due to age-related health issues. Number 2. Courtney Stauffer. For over a decade, a Pennsylvania family has been traumatized by the heartbreak of not knowing what happened to their missing loved one. While spending an evening out with friends in Harrisburg in July 2012, 21-year-old Courtney Stauffer got into an argument with someone at a bar. She ended up going home to the apartment that she shared with her boyfriend, who was on house arrest at the time as part of his probation for a criminal conviction. There was a party going on at the apartment, even though Courtney's boyfriend wasn't supposed to be around alcohol. Then, after receiving a noise complaint, police came and broke up the party and arrested Courtney's boyfriend for violating his probation. Believing her boyfriend could be facing a lengthy sentence behind bars, Courtney was extremely upset and angry about the arrest. So she and a friend confronted her downstairs neighbor, who they suspected of calling the cops. And at 3 a.m., the police were once again called to the scene, this time to break up the argument between Courtney and the neighbors. Officers left the building shortly before 4 a.m. after getting the parties to return to their apartments. But less than 25 minutes later, the police were called to the address for a third time when the neighbor complained that Courtney was stomping on the floor above them. However, nobody answered when officers knocked on both Courtney's and the neighbor's door, so they left the scene. Courtney hasn't been seen or heard from ever since. A friend who stayed at Courtney's apartment that night claimed that he and Courtney were there when police came the third time, but that they didn't hear officers knocking. The friend further stated that when he woke up the next day, Courtney was nowhere to be found, but all of her belongings had been left behind, including her wallet, cell phone, car, and dog. Authorities suspect foul play, despite no signs of violence or a struggle being found at the scene, but they continue to hope that someone with information will come forward and help solve the case. Number 1. Michael VanZant. On what began as a normal Saturday night in March 2016, 36-year-old Michael VanZant met up with friends in Hermosa Beach, California, with plans to watch a UFC fight and go bar hopping. And afterward, he planned to crash at a hotel room he'd rented at a nearby Quality Inn. After the fight was over, Mike's group decided to go to a bar called the American Junkie. They were waiting in line to get inside at around 10:15 p.m. when Mike stepped into a liquor shop next door. By the time he left, his friend group had split up and gone into different bars. Surveillance footage from the area showed that Mike spent several hours searching for his friends on foot, and in the meantime, his friends tried contacting him to let him know where they were. But Mike's phone was dead, and he was never able to reconnect with the group. Phone records later confirmed that members of the group had tried reaching him at least 20 times. And at certain points throughout the night, Mike was no more than 60 feet away from his friends, but they just kept missing each other. Mike eventually went back to the liquor store, where he purchased an unknown item. He was last captured by a security camera as he walked through a parking lot toward the beach. He never returned to his hotel room or showed up at work the following Monday. There's been no sign of Mike ever since, leaving a big question on both his whereabouts and the circumstances surrounding his disappearance. Authorities haven't found any evidence of foul play, so they suspect that Mike may have accidentally drowned. But until or unless he's found, Nobody will ever know for sure. If a close friend vanished during a night out and you later learned that they disappeared on purpose, would you be angry at them for the emotional turmoil caused by their absence? Or would you simply be relieved that they were okay? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.